Many of today's young adults have already lived through two once-in-a-lifetime economic upheavals: the Great Recession in 2008 through 2009, and the COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020. The cumulative effects of the Great Recession, COVID-19, and the social and economic disruption of recent years have taken a toll on young adult financial prospects, but the effects have not been evenly distributed for all. In our report, The Financial Health of Young America, we used a combination of public and original survey data to look at income, employment, home ownership, student debt, retirement savings, and the way that the pandemic affected all of these things. The picture is clear. Racial gaps in income and wealth were not getting better in the years before the pandemic, and the disruption of COVID-19 made things much worse for young adults of color.
Well, honestly, for me, saving and looking for meaningful work has been a bit tough. When going to the Borough of Manhattan Community College, in which I eventually transferred over to Hunter College, I really didn't know anything about anything. I kind of went in completely not knowing what's going on, not knowing the process, how everything works, not knowing about the opportunities outside of the classroom, the different jobs and gigs that are offered by the college. I feel that sometimes the lack of information can be a key factor in not being able to, jump on an opportunity.
Levels of employment and income have long had racial gaps. And while there's much said about the racial diversity of millennials and Gen Z, that does not make these racial gaps disappear. The Great Recession affected net wealth for young adults, but by the late 2010s, young adults who were white have begun to see a recovery of wealth that young Blacks and Latinx people were not enjoying. In 2019, white young adult families had a median net worth of almost $46,000, higher than Black families in the same age cohort. Home ownership has long been a primary way to build wealth and financial security. Unfortunately, it's felt out of reach for most young adults. Young adult home ownership rates remain below previous highs and remain lowest among young people of color.
The biggest piece is generational wealth. I mean, me being a young African American woman and being from this city, and with the rent prices going up and fighting for that, housing and things of that nature that are political, for me, the finance piece is just that generational wealth. Once I pass on, if I don't have a home that I can own, what's next? It's almost like mourning a death, right? Not a physical death, but a death of a family legacy, or just a death of, the next generation being able to call a place home. So I feel like for me, it hasn't been really accessible, and it hasn't been really a way for folks to advocate on that piece. So for me, it's a little disheartening, it's a little disappointing.
As of late summer 2020, there was more than $1.5 trillion in outstanding student debt in the United States. The drag of high student loan debt can have huge financial consequences, as well as major impact on other aspects of young people's lives. President Biden's recent decision to relieve $10,000 in student debt from most of those with federal student loans, along with an additional $10,000 for Pell Grant recipients, will provide welcome relief to many low-balance borrowers and borrowers from low-income backgrounds.
Student debt has impacted my finances negatively. It's been a monthly burden that I have had since graduating college, to the point where there was a time where I couldn't do my monthly payments, and my checks eventually started getting garnished, which was not very fun because nobody likes to see money taken away from their paycheck on top of everything that already gets deducted.
All of the financial data leading up to the pandemic shows that racial wealth gap were not disappearing, but the monumental economic disruption of the pandemic made things much worse. Young people were the most likely to lose their job from the pandemic, and young people of color were more likely than their white peers to be out of work. This uneven outcome of the pandemic also led to stark differences in the lives of young adults in the early months of the pandemic. Young people of color were much more likely to report a missing or late house payment and were more likely to experience food insecurity than their white peers.
Before the pandemic, I was driving for Uber and I was making up to $2,500 a month. My husband was making roughly the same. After the pandemic hit, I couldn't keep driving. People didn't want to be in an enclosed space with somebody during that time, and my husband's hours were reduced. Our income took a big hit. We had to move back in with my in-laws.
Food insecurity, homelessness is a big problem, especially in New York and big cities. The lack of mental health services, and really the lack of funds to be able to get, for example, supplies for school or the bare necessities that you need. Those are ones that really stand out to me.
The economic forces that have created and sustained racial wealth gaps among young adults are the result of the decisions made by policymakers. There are concrete ways that policymakers can address these issues, like raising the minimum wage, promoting debt-free college, and expanding tax credits that help young adults.
I think young adults right now, what they need is a little bit of compassion, a little bit of support, and a little bit of leeway. We're here, but we're barely surviving.
Download our report for a full list of policy proposals that are necessary to tackle these problems holding back our economy and our country.